A new update on the merger between WarnerMedia and Discovery that could have major ramifications for AEW in the future. We also have an update on a new team signed to an AEW/Ring of Honor contract, and the AEW Rampage ratings rise significantly. All this and more in today's AEW news. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of All Elite Wrestling today. So let's start off talking about this merger between Discovery and WarnerMedia. Now, this is kind of fascinating because I remember when you look back in the history of WCW and they said the merger between AOL and Time Warner and how much ramifications that had for WCW and why that was a big part of the collapse of WCW. And there were lots of other stuff involved in there, bad writing, bad booking, creative issues, financial issues, mismanagement, etc., etc., etc. There are plenty of reasons as to why WCW failed, but one was a merger of AOL and Time Warner, and that reportedly was a big problem because when they merged together, the person who became the new head of that basically said, we don't want pro wrestling, and that was a problem. I think was it Brad Siegel, whoever it may be. Nevertheless, there is another merger of Discovery and WarnerMedia coming soon, and a lot of people have said, how is this going to affect AEW? Dave Meltzer, who I know some people have some feelings on Dave, and certainly I do, particularly when it comes to biases and all that kind of stuff, but he obviously has very close connections to AEW. I mean, the closest in being he is friends with Tony Khan. And a new report has laid open the realities of the corporate merger between WarnerMedia and Discovery and how it could possibly affect the future of AEW going forward. Now, WarnerMedia, which of course owns TBS and TNT, is set to merge with Discovery, and WarnerMedia CEO Jason Kilar is already a casualty with warnings of more cuts to come in this new media conglomerate that would be, I'm not even sure what it would be called, Discovery, WarnerMedia, I'm not sure. But the New York Post is reporting that the new CEO, David Zashav, apologies, I probably butchered the name there, is expected to, quote, take a scalpel to the new company, which will be known as Warner Bros. Discovery. That's what it's going to be called, Warner Brothers Discovery. Now, billionaire media mogul John Malone, who is a longtime stakeholder in Discovery, previously commented that, quote, cost synergies, read cuts, for the newly merged company should be expected to go, quote, easily past $3 billion to $4 billion per year. Again, quite significant. Now, how does this all tie into AEW? Well, of course, AEW has the contract with WarnerMedia, airing shows on TBS and TNT. Is AEW going to be affected? Now, either way, it's not going to be the same as it was totally with WCW because WCW was owned by WarnerMedia, and which isn't the case in this when it comes to AEW because AEW is its own separate entity. Now, on the latest episode of Wrestling Observer Radio, Dave Meltzer discussed the merger and says it will be, quote, very significant for the future of AEW. Hat tip here to Inside the Ropes, who have all of these quotes here, so huge thanks to them. Dave said, quote, the merger is happening and it's taking effect. The new people are being put in place and there's a fear of massive layoffs due to duplication. One of the things is that Discovery, which is going to be running this, that they are historically aren't a company that looks to spend a lot of money, so how this all goes down is anyone's guess. What this means as far as AEW goes is anyone's guess, but it's very significant to AEW. We just don't know how yet. We don't know if the new people are going to look at the ratings of wrestling, the ratings of AEW, and go, these are good ratings, the Wednesday shows are really good, and give them a big new contract. If I don't see the contract, it's like I know everyone thinks they're going to get this giant contract, and they might, but they may need to get another bidder in there, and they need to make a streaming deal, which has been talked about forever. I think if they have the TV show and a streaming deal, it can be one of those things where there's data that proves everyone's looking at the streaming, HBO Max as being the big moneymaker down the line. But if they can get on an HBO Max, then they have tangible proof, they are moving numbers, they will not get axed. They will keep the TV, I'm relatively certain, because it's one of those things with the whole synergy with the whole company. Again, these are Meltzer words, so, apologies for the rambling quotes, but that's how he talks. Meltzer continued by stating that AEW has to build momentum towards the end of 2023 to ensure the best possible deal, and warns that Tony Khan's company could be squeezed by the amounts paid to, quote, big sports. But the TV deal is not that far away. It's at the end of 2023 when this deal expires, which means that the late 2022, early 2023 is going to be the negotiating period. Obviously, it's very incumbent on AEW to really heat up in the fall. It's very important that they heat up in the fall and look like they've got momentum. But a lot of things are going to be looked at, and it's not just ratings, although ratings are key. If they get a deal where they stay on maybe a nominal increase, it's going to be very tough because WWE is going to get a big increase from USA, I'm virtually certain. The thing is with Discovery, they're locked into this NHL deal for years, and they're going to do everything in their power to keep the NBA deal because the NBA deal and baseball, the big sports, are going to get their money. If there's less money in television, they want to make cuts, and the big sports are going to get their money. The middle sports, and AEW would be considered middle sports. They're the ones that maybe will suffer in this, despite ratings. That's not for sure, but this change will be very, very significant story come 9 to 10 months from now, because that AEW deal is probably going to be the most significant pro wrestling news story of 2023. Dave Meltzer finished by pointing out that whatever deal AEW gets will determine their ability to bid for top tier talent and keep some of their own whose contracts are up in the next couple of years. Quote, that will determine how competitive they can be as far as negotiating for other contracts. If they get a big increase, some of these guys like Kevin Owens, who stayed with WWE, who was very open about being interested, but they were not going to go into the millions and millions for Kevin Owens at the level WWE did. There's a lot of guys who have considered, and AEW has not spent big. They spent big on Adam Cole, and Bryan Danielson was a big deal, obviously, to them. Some of the other deals, obviously, when they started, are coming due. Omega is next year. Moxley, I think, is coming due. Some of those deals are going to be very expensive. I don't know what Moxley would. I don't know that Moxley would ever go back to WWE based on what he has said. I think that one's unlikely. But a lot of those guys, like Maxwell Jacob Friedman, who is the one that gets talked about the most, when it comes to that, if they get a $100 million TV deal, I would suspect there's a really good chance that Max Friedman gets a really good deal from AEW and doesn't go. If they get a $45 million deal, that could make a big difference to how much they'd be willing to spend to keep him versus how much he would get offered elsewhere. So obviously, I get that there's a lot that's been said there, but the idea is that we don't really know. We don't really know what could happen when it comes to that. And I think people are in AEW are, of course, a bit nervous when it comes to the merger. I think that, again, in comparison, WWE's on very sure footing, especially with Raw. We don't really know with Fox. I mean, Fox could, at the end of the TV deal with SmackDown, look at it and go, we thought the ratings were going to be a bit higher. We paid a lot of money. Thanks, but no thanks. And if that is the case, SmackDown will go back on USA Network and they'll just go back to what they got before. WWE's got a really good relationship with NBC Universal. That's why they pay them so much money for Raw. That's why they're on Peacock. That's not a problem. AEW is obviously very tied in with WarnerMedia, but they were tied in with the old WarnerMedia. And Discovery, when this merger happens, look to be in charge. Maybe like Dave Meltzer says, they realize that a lot of money's being spent on big sports, whether it's the hockey, whether it's the NBA, which will be kept, whether it's baseball, which again will be kept. AEW, it just depends how they perceive it. They might look at AEW and like I said, they might look at the Wednesday show certainly and say, look, most weeks, not every week, but most weeks, AEW on Wednesday is the number one show on cable, or very close. It's in that top 5. And whether or not they'd be able to achieve that with another show or another brand or another whatever they would have in that place, I don't know. But AEW got a good deal. Certainly, when they first started on TNT, they didn't get paid anything. They got a percentage of ad revenue. They were producing a show, and with the adverts, they got a percentage of that. It was such a success that WarnerMedia said, yes, we want to keep you and lock you in way, way longer, and now we'll pay you to produce this show. Hence why they became pretty much profitable immediately, apart from obviously the game, which put them into the red for that first couple of years. But there was a big success for AEW. Now, if you're a successful company, when your television contract comes due, you can negotiate for a higher price. I think what Dave Meltzer's point is that come the end of 2023, they would hope to be in a better position than they are now. And frankly, they are in a good position. Even if they were to renegotiate right now, they're in a good position. Year on year, they're up like nearly 50% in terms of the viewership and the key demographic. Not many TV shows are doing that. So that is certainly a positive. Where will they be in a year's time? Where will they be? That's the big question. If they get to the end of the year and, they're regularly over 1 million, because you never know at this point, it's either sort of 900 to 1 million. If they're regularly over 1 million and their key demo goes up, I think it kind of pushes WarnerMedia or Discovery, whatever it's going to be called, to sign them to a more lucrative deal, and the money will go up, and that will mean, as Dave Meltzer is talking about, people like Jon Moxley, people like Kenny Omega, people like MJF, who probably are on smaller deals in comparison to a CM Punk and Bryan Danielson, they can be signed at a higher rate, which obviously will be what they're looking for. If it's reduced, and that could happen, then AEW won't be in trouble in terms of financially, but they'll have to let people go, and more names will jump back to WWE. So the end of the year is going to be a really interesting time for AEW, and now's the time to really keep an eye out when it comes to the viewership and the ratings. I do expect them to increase because AEW's peak is usually over the sort of late summer, around All Out time, around that period of time. And it's just going to be absolutely curious to see where did they go next, and do they put themselves in a really strong position to renegotiate. I think, as Dave Meltzer mentions, if they can get on HBO Max and there's tangible evidence that, there's more analytics there, not just the ratings, but also streaming numbers and all that kind of stuff. Like if they go on HBO Max and they do really good numbers on HBO Max, then again, they can go to WarnerMedia and say, look, you've got to pay us for this streaming deal. And also because we do so well on there, our price points become higher. So all of that is absolutely fascinating, and I do think it's going to be a story that gets a lot bigger as the year goes on, and this time next year it's going to be absolutely fascinating, no doubt about it. Let's talk about a team that has signed with AEW / Ring of Honor. The Gates of Agony has reportedly signed to wrestle in AEW / Ring of Honor. Now, the recent Supercard of Honor event saw Toa Leona and Korn debut as the Gates of Agony. They were introduced as the newest clients of Tully Blanchard before they picked up an easy victory over Cheeseburger and Eli Isom. Later on in the show, Blanchard introduced Brian Cage as the third member of Tully Blanchard Enterprises as Cage defeated Ninja Mac. Blanchard will now manage Korn, Leona, and Cage in Ring of Honor and apparently AEW at times. In an update, Leona spoke with the Coffin Radio podcast this week and was asked if he signed to AEW. He said, quote, "It's official, I'm signed with them." Leona said when he was asked if he was signed to AEW, "I'm part of the Ring of Honor roster, but I'm contracted, so you never know, I might pop up on TBS or TNT, watch Dynamite and Rampage." Furthermore, Fightful Select is also reporting that Korn is also signed and is part of the Ring of Honor roster as well. It was noted that he is technically under contract to AEW. So this is going to be the situation, I think, going forward with these Ring of Honor talents. They will be signed to AEW contracts while they still figure out what Ring of Honor is for the time being, but they'll be earmarked to mainly be appearing on Ring of Honor, and occasionally they'll do crossover shows. I mean, think about it. If they manage this right, if Tony Khan manages this right and keeps Ring of Honor a largely separate entity from AEW, then once a year they could do a big crossover show, and I think it would do good business for AEW. Whether or not, again, it's just going to be how separate he keeps these two entities. It looks like at the moment his plan is to keep them as two separate entities and, again, have this crossover, but there will be names that will largely appear on Ring of Honor and names that will largely appear on AEW, and eventually they'll cross over, and eventually they'll move from one territory to the other. And with this big roster and with names struggling to get time on the show, I think it's the right thing, and I think it's the smart thing, frankly, for AEW and Ring of Honor to do. Let's talk about Rampage on Friday. A lot of people were really highly praising Friday's Rampage because it had that great main event, of course, with Wheeler Yuta and Jon Moxley. And Friday's taped edition of AEW Rampage drew an average of 600,000 viewers on TNT, according to Nielsen via Showbuzz Daily. And this is up significantly, up 31.58% from the previous week's taped episode, which drew 456,000 viewers. Rampage drew a 0.25 rating in the 1849 key demographic, which is up 66.66% from the previous week's episode, which only drew a 0.15 rating in the key demographic. Now, Friday's Rampage ranked number 4 for the night in the cable top 150 with the 0.25 key demo rating, which is up from the prior week's number 18 ranking. Friday's Rampage ranked 66 in viewership for the night on cable, which is up significantly also from the previous week's 98 ranking. Now, Friday's Rampage drew the second best audience of the year so far, behind Beach Break's episode on January 28, and the key demo rating was tied with Beach Break for the best key demo rating of the year. which again is very significant. And even they had strong competition with the Masters Golf on ESPN also as well. So who would have thought it? And I mentioned this before, like if you watch most episodes of Rampage in recent weeks and months, they're not necessarily bad shows to watch. There's just kind of meaningless and pointless. Not a lot really happens on there. You might have the occasional title change and all that kind of stuff, but realistically, if you miss an episode of Rampage, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the main storyline. It doesn't affect it when you watch AEW Dynamite the next week. The way going forward and the way to keep up this momentum when it comes to Rampage, book angles that matter, book matches that matter, put big stars on that show. And they're going to be doing that by having Hangman Page versus Adam Cole, AEW World Championship match. That's going to be a live episode. Obviously, the time slot is difficult, and it's always going to be difficult. When they're airing at 10 p.m., it's always going to be a problem. And with being taped, it's always going to be a problem. I think, and again, this goes back to what we started off talking about with WarnerMedia. If they got to a point where it aired on Saturdays, it was 2 hours, and it was live, and it was 8 to 10, that would be a bit different, and maybe the ratings would be significantly better than they are at the moment. But I think going forward, to keep these numbers up here, which is probably where they would want them to be, is to have big stars on that show and matches that matter. That's the way to happen. That's the way to do it. Whether or not that will continue to happen, we'll have to wait and see. So big matches announced for tonight's episode of AEW Dynamite on TBS. See CM Punk go up against Penta Oscuro. This is going to be a really, really exciting one. I'm really excited to watch this one this evening. Now, 2 more matches have been announced for this week's episode of AEW Dynamite on TBS. Now, CM Punk took to Twitter over the weekend and tagged several AEW stars for a potential match on this week's show. This included FTR, Ring of Honor Pure Champion Wheeler Yuta, Penta Oscuro, Kyle O'Reilly, Tony Nese, Dustin Rhodes, Bryan Danielson, Jonathan Gresham, John Silver, and the Young Bucks. He said, well, basically, look, anyone except Eddie Kingston. That's literally what he said. Now, Penta was one of the wrestlers who responded to Punk. He wrote, quote, "Let's do it. I am ready." Now, AEW President, CEO, General Manager, and Head of Creative Tony Khan took to Twitter yesterday afternoon and booked Punk versus Penta for Dynamite. This will be another first time ever match. Khan wrote, quote, "Tomorrow night, Wednesday, April 13, Lakefront Arena in New Orleans, Louisiana, AEW Dynamite on TBS, Penta versus Punk. You wanted the best, you got the best." Kingston responded to the Punk Penta announcement and wrote, quote, "Side note, let's go Penta, F you Punk." Now, on a related note, Marina Shafir will make her AEW TV debut during tonight's Dynamite episode. She'll go up against Sky Blue. Shafir and AEW TBS champion Jade Cargill have had a war of words of late, building obviously to an upcoming match. And AEW noted in their announcement that Cargill will be watching closely tomorrow night, or tonight rather. Now, after WWE released Shafir in June of 2021, she made her AEW debut with a loss to Chris Statlander on a December episode of Dark. Since then, she's picked up dark wins over Valentina Rossi, Reka Takaka, Danielle Kamala, and Lila Gray. So the full card for this evening reads as Punk versus Penta. Marina Shafir makes her TV debut against Sky Blue. MJF versus Sean Dean. You've got that 6-man tag team match of Santana and Ortiz and Eddie Kingston versus Jericho, Hager, and Garcia of the Jericho Appreciation Society. An AEW World Tag Team Championship match, Jurassic Express versus Red Dragon. We've got the Ring of Honor Television Championship match also with Minoru Suzuki against Samoa Joe. Jay Lethal and Sonjay Dutt are promising a big surprise for Samoa Joe. We've also got Keith Lee and Swerve Strickland versus Powerhouse Hobbs and Ricky Starks. We've got a load of shows we always do for Dynamite. The Penta versus Punk match, look, that's super exciting. Again, I find it kind of, I spoke about this yesterday when it came to the, or was it Monday when I was talking about the Cody Rhodes stuff on Raw. I do find it somewhat baffling, the amount of people that complain about Punk facing these people that he wouldn't usually face on television. They'll go, CM Punk came in and he was meant to be this big game changer, blah, 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 and he's facing off against Max Caster, or he's facing off against Dax Harwood, or he's facing off against, I don't know, he's facing off against Sean Dean, or he's facing off against, whoever, Powerhouse Hobbs. When's he going to face Kenny Omega? When's he going to face Bryan Danielson? When's he going to face Hangman Page? When's he going to do this? When's he going to do that? And my response always is like, what do you want? Like on television every single week, if he came in and he faced Kenny Omega in the main event of Dynamite, people would say, what a waste. Why aren't they doing it on pay-per-view? Why aren't they doing it on pay-per-view? You can't win with some of these people. It's just bizarre. And it was the same with Cody Rhodes on Raw. The same people that complain about Cody Rhodes versus The Miz. Why is he not facing, I don't know, Bobby Lashley? Why is he not facing Roman Reigns immediately? And it makes The Miz on Raw. Who wants to tune in to watch that? It's television. It's the reason. It's televised. You're meant to build to the pay-per-view. That's how it's always worked. And it's exciting. First time ever match. Penta's a big deal. Like, maybe not as much as he was, you know, prior to getting into a tag team. Sometimes you kind of get a little bit lost in being in a tag team. I know, but still, like, Pentagon Jr. was a massive, massive deal like 5 or 6 years ago, right? He still is a big deal. He's a great singles wrestler. This is a match that you'd never think you were going to see this match, ever. And it's exciting. It's very, of course, Punk's going to win, and I'm sure Penta's happy to put him over. Like, Penta shouldn't be beating CM Punk. But the amount of people that will complain about this is just wild. Like, if you don't like it, don't tune in. Like, it's not very difficult. I just find it bizarre. I really, really do. That whole everything's a complaint, right? The Marina Shafir stuff as well. Like, she's not going to beat Jade Cargill. I think they're doing their best. As with anything, when you have a streak, which is what they're doing Jade Cargill, it's a streak. She's unbeaten. She's undefeated. You have to try and build up credible challenges. Is Marina Shafir the most credible challenger from a pro wrestling standpoint? No. I think they'll tap into the MMA background and try and do it from that point of view. It's a different skill set, and she's a badass and all that kind of stuff, but Jade Cargill will eventually win. That's what they'll do. But look, it's a loaded show, certainly for Dynamite as well. Speaking of the show as well, this week's AEW Dynamite on TBS will actually have an overrun as well, keeping the show on the air past 10 p.m. Eastern. Now, what does that mean? Do they have a big angle planned? Maybe. Sometimes with WWE in the past, they had the big overrun because they had a big angle planned. They used to never have it, basically, with WCW. Back in the day, you'd have matches in the middle of it. They just go off the air because they ran out of time. But Tony Khan took to Twitter yesterday to announce that TBS has granted the company an overrun for Dynamite tonight. He said, quote, "Thanks to our great fans, great ratings, and great card of matches set for Wednesday Night Dynamite, TBS has granted us an overrun for AEW Dynamite tomorrow. It may be just a few minutes, but whatever happens, there's a chance we'll run past 10 p.m. Eastern time on Dynamite." So that's what the plan is. I would assume it's because they've got some big angle planned. A lot of the times when it comes to the overrun, and now this was very much the Monday Night Wars kind of period of time, but WCW would have maybe and WWE tried to utilize the same thing once they got in a really good relationship with their network. They would have used the overrun to pop a really big number because the other show would end, and once it ended, most people, not everyone, but most people would all come over, and then you got this big ending number. They'd see this big show closing angle. Now, I don't think it really works like that nowadays because it's kind of the opposite. Now, with most pro wrestling shows, the most people watching are right at the beginning of the show. They will give you that chance. The people will tune in and say, okay, convince me to watch the rest of the show. And it's whether that first segment is good or if it's not good, they'll tune out. That's how it works. That's why, you remember a couple of years ago when SmackDown was on Christmas Day and they had an NFL match before it, and the number was so big for SmackDown, it was like 3 million people or something ridiculous. It's because there was a load of people watching the NFL game. Most tuned out when they realized that WWE was coming on, but a lot of people said, you know what, I haven't watched wrestling in a while. Let's have a look at what it is. And then they watch it and they go, no. Or they go, yes, and that's what happens. So we'll see what happens when it comes to the overrun. Speaking of the Rampage ratings, I know we spoke about that earlier, but Tony Khan also said, quote, "Thank you all who helped to reach our biggest audience for Rampage on TNT in months and the best demo rating in our time slot since October 1. Rampage will be in an early slot this Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and we're back on TBS tomorrow for Dynamite." As I mentioned, Friday's Rampage will start at 7 p.m. Eastern Time instead of 10 due to the NBA coverage beginning at 9 p.m. Rampage will air live from the Curtis Caldwell Center in Garland, Texas. The only match announced as of this recording is Adam Cole versus Hangman Page in a Texas death match for the AEW World Championship. I'm sure more matches will be announced tonight as well, but it's going to be a bit of an interesting experiment, I suppose, as well. Being live and also being at 7 p.m., well, they actually do better numbers than they would have previously. What is quite interesting too, and I hadn't really thought about this, and I don't really know what the rules are in America, it must be said, but like the Texas Death Match, there's going to be blood, and can they do that at like 7 p.m.? I guess it's cable, right? But over here, like if it's before the watershed, which is 9 p.m., I don't know if they could do that. That's an interesting thing to think about, I suppose, for the future. So let me know your thoughts on today's AEW news stories in the comments section below. Be sure to like and subscribe to Wrestle News 365, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.